Welcome to the Play-by-Play with Patrick and Brandon. You're a home for updates and insights into the sports world. All right, welcome back to the Play-by-Play. As always, I'm Patrick. I'm here with Brandon, and today is a very special episode because we have a pretty extraordinary guest. So, thank you for joining us, and please welcome Northeastern alum and NFL Nation reporter for the Dallas Cowboys, Todd Archer. Thank you for
How you
joining
doing,
us.
guys? Yeah, no problem. Extraordinary. I don't know about that, but yeah, appreciate you guys having me on.
Extraordinary for our caliber, that's for sure.
Okay.
Um,
Hopefully I won't disappoint.
So, I think I want to start just in the world of sports media specifically,
Okay.
because that's what Brandon and I are trying to get into right now. Obviously, avid sports fans, both sports media and communications students, and this is a world that you've been dominating.
I
Head
don't know about
reporter for the
that.
Dallas Cowboys. Um, so I wanted to start with you went to college at Northeastern, correct?
Right. Yep.
And so how was Northeastern's program and like how did that affect like your entry into the sports media world?
It was fantastic. So Northeastern has a co-op program. I'm sure you guys are familiar with where you go to school, you work, you go to school, it kind of bounces back and forth where you're getting real life experience while you're in school. And my co-ops, they were all at the Boston Globe. And it started simply just by answering phones and taking high school scores. Or you guys won't believe this, they used to call us and ask us bets from a bar. There was no Google back then where they could go on their phone. So they would call us with trivia questions that we would try and answer for them. So it started doing that. And then my junior year, I started covering high school sports for the Globe. My junior and senior year, I did that. So I was, it was right when the Globe started their top 25 for football. So every Tuesday, I'd have a front page story on the front of the Globe sports section about this week's top 25 or a high school feature that we did. It was really a new thing that they had done. And, working there kind of in my mind, gave me a head start on people who were just weren't doing things and didn't have to be at the Globe, right? It could have been any local newspaper that as soon as you're getting that experience, that's what matters the most. I didn't work at the Northeastern School newspaper. I spent all my time at the Globe covering high school sports, getting to know guys like Will McDonough. Oh, I don't know if you guys are going to remember any of these dudes. Will McDonough, Lee Montville, Bob Ryan, Dan Shaughnessy's obviously still around. Working with those guys, and it was really something that I would never say this to my professors, but I learned more there than I did in my classes because I think you learn more by doing. And the co-op program gave you a chance to do and make mistakes and take some chances you wouldn't have taken and do some different things that way. So I would recommend to anybody Northeastern. I couldn't get into the school now; it's way too hard to get into. But I would recommend the co-op program to anybody who's asking me.
Awesome. Awesome. Um, so one other thing I wanted to ask about is the transition into the sports media world. If I'm correct, you were a soccer player, right?
Yeah, I played soccer, basketball, and baseball in high school,
Awesome.
all at a very mediocre level.
So do you do you think like having that background in sports and especially in like a wide variety of sports, does that prepare you at all to move into the sports media world? Like that background, maybe even covering sports that you might not have played at such a level? Because I know obviously now you cover football.
Right.
So do you think that being in sports, even if they were different sports, prepares you for that world?
Obviously it's not at that level, right? So I'm not comparing anything that we did in at Midway High School or playing Milford Legion baseball. I'm not comparing, although I did have a buddy of mine played in the big leagues for 10 years, Mark Sweeney from Holliston. I don't know if that name rings a bell. He's now doing Cardinals television stuff.
Wow.
Um, but and guys went and played in LSU and things like that. But it didn't hurt. I'll say it that way. And again, because you kind of have a mindset of an athlete, even if you're not on that level, where you kind of try to understand what they're thinking and what they're seeing. And you mentioned like like I said, I played soccer, basketball, and baseball. I've been covering the NFL now since 1997. I didn't play a down of football in my life. And my friends, that did play football would kind of make fun of me for playing soccer and things like that. But I think it kind of helped me early on, especially ask questions that may have been dumb to some of the coaches and players' minds back when I was covering the Bengals. But it was coming from a place of, hey, I don't know, help me out here. And I think as you go and you're around it more, you pick up on things and you learn things. And now I will gladly put my football knowledge up next to any of my high school football buddies that think they know stuff about the game, and I can just run circles around them now. But there's another story too. Like my first job out of college, I worked at the Concord, New Hampshire Monitor, and I was hired to cover NASCAR. And I couldn't change a tire. I can't change oil. I can't. I'm an idiot when it comes to that stuff. So again, that helped me like asking questions, like not knowing some of the basics, A, about the car, and B, certainly about the level of racing, like Busch North or Winston Cup back in the day, stuff like that. Um, just asking questions and being genuinely curious about it. And I think that helped me. And I think having that sports background of playing kind of gave you an understanding of that athlete's mindset, that driver's mindset of what they might have been thinking in certain situations, and you can kind of come at it with questions from there, where you respect what they do and how they got to where they are, and not comparing again the level that I played on by any stretch, but understanding their thought process. I think it does help you out.
That's awesome. Um, you talked about how you worked in Boston and Concord, and then you also, before ending up in Dallas, you also ended up covering the Bengals and the Dolphins. So one thing I'm curious about is how is, as a professional, how is like the transition from city to city? And did you have to change up like your style of work moving from place to place? And then even just like the cities, like how did you take that transfer personally? Because I can imagine they're not very similar places.
Right. So I'm remembering it was right around this time in 1996 when I moved to Cincinnati, and I can still picture driving out of my parents' driveway and getting on the highway and driving to Cincinnati for my first job and thinking, my God, what am I doing? Like, I don't know anybody in Cincinnati. I've never been there before. But I just felt it was a chance that I had to take to further my career. I could have stayed. I was back at the Globe and I was working in their weekly sections and working on the desk at night and helping out with some Bruins and Celtics coverage and things like that, some Patriots stuff, college sports. But if I stayed there, I don't know if I ever would have. Well, I certainly would have met my wife because she lived in Cincinnati at the time. But I don't think I would have been willing to take a chance, right? I mean, you're going to a new city that you don't know anybody, and you're with you know all different expectations that you had when you're in Boston. That you're at the Globe, right? Back then, it was the best of the best. It was one of the best sports section in the country. And then you go into a smaller paper, and then you see how in Concord, you see how that's done there, where you're involved in every little process down to cutting the stories before they go to print on the actual cutting the type before it would go. You guys have no idea what I'm talking about when I get to that stuff. Um, and in the comp room and doing all that, and then going to Cincinnati, and I covered Xavier basketball my first year, and I love college basketball to this day and still do. And then covering the Bengals for the 3 years that I covered them, and then going down to Miami and covering the Dolphins for those 3 years. It was after Jimmy Johnson and Dan Marino left, so I felt like that helped me not start on even footing with the guys that I was competing against, but they certainly didn't have the background with a Dave Wanstead or a Jay Fiedler became the quarterback that I was able. So I felt like I was on even footing a little bit when it came to that. But I didn't change like my style or how I try and write or how I'd interview because of where I was. I felt like I had a good uh, genuine curiosity, as I said earlier, about things, about sports, and not just, hey, this guy's a great football player. They're all great football players. You know what I mean? You want to tell them something a little bit different about the people that you're covering. So it didn't really change my, like I said, my style and how I write and how I ask questions. It probably just opened my eyes up to a different way of doing things that you're used to back where we live in Massachusetts or back at the Globe or and things like that, where it's still great, but there are other ways you can get it done. And I'm really appreciative of that, to have experienced the Midwest, to experience the South, and now to have been in Dallas for 20 plus years, like to live in this part of the country. I'm really appreciative of seeing different parts of the country that I probably never dreamed of when I was growing up.
Obviously, you just mentioned Massachusetts, and you've covered Dolphins, Bengals, college basketball. When you transition into covering a different team in a different area, obviously they have their own dedicated fan base. Do you ever find yourself becoming like a personal fan of the teams that you cover, or is it sort of a strictly business thing, like we're just covering this?
Yeah, it's business, and I don't say like you turn it off where you're a fan of the sport. If you ever lose your joy of the game that you're covering, then I don't think you should be in this business. But I've never been a Cowboys fan. I've never been a Dolphins fan. I was never a Bengals fan. Um, you, you root for people that you enjoy, that you've gotten to know, and you want to see them have success. But it still doesn't change that if they have a poor game, of having to ask the hard, difficult question. Um, so that is, I would say that's the big thing, is that you don't lose your fandom for the game, your love of the games that you cover, or just any game really. That's the one thing. Like Bob Ryan at the Globe, he's retired now, but when he did retire, I sent him a letter just saying thank you for being someone that still loved everything he did about the job, but about the games that he covered, and he never came across as cynical and beaten down and worn down. And I try and remember that, but when you're covering a team, as now I'm going into my 20, hold on, 21st, 22nd year of covering the Cowboys, it's it can be mundane, and you're doing the same things over and over again. You're just changing the names from Tony Romo to Dak Prescott, right? I mean, it's the same stuff, especially with the Cowboys, right, where they've not gone to a Super Bowl in forever and gotten to a conference championship game. But I don't think it's affected my curiosity level. I don't think it's affected my love of watching the games, um, or any of that stuff. But I don't think you can't really be, and my friends don't understand this. You can't be a fan of the teams you cover. Like when my friends say, "Oh, you work for the Cowboys." No, I don't work for the Cowboys. I cover the Cowboys for ESPN. There is a pretty big distinction there. So um, you still maintain your love of the game, and you want to see some individual people that you like do well, but you're not rooting for the Cowboys to win a game, and you're not rooting for them to lose either. Honestly, you want the story, you want the best story possible. And at this time of 22 years covering this team, the best story possible is probably them getting to a Super Bowl. Because I've never seen what this thing's like in 20 years around Dallas. Everybody just tells me what it was like in the 90s and the 70s.
Sort of honing in on that, and the Cowboys, obviously, they're under a spotlight all the time because they're, such a big team on the national scale, huge market. Like you said, they haven't been to a Super Bowl since Troy Aikman. Is there any season that you've covered the Cowboys that you maybe thought was special or was going to be the one? And was there a season that you thought maybe stuck out to you as being particularly interesting to cover?
Wow, that's a good question. There's a few where I thought they would make a run. 2007, they go 13-3. They have the best record in the NFC. They have home field advantage. Romo's ascending. Jason Witten's ascending. DeMarcus Ware, the guys that were excellent players. One's in the Hall of Fame. Jason Witten will one day get there. Um, I thought that team was going to make that run and get there, and they lose in the divisional round to the Giants, who actually go on and beat the Patriots. And their perfect season that year. The 2014 Cowboys, I don't know if you guys remember the Dez Bryant catch no catch deal that happened in the playoffs. I thought if they got that win in Green Bay, that they could have gone to Seattle and gotten to the Super Bowl, because they had already beaten Seattle in Seattle that year. And then a couple years ago, there's probably another one in there that I'm missing. Dak's rookie year, they went 13-3, and again lost in the divisional round at home to the Packers. But just a couple years ago, when they were the 2 seed, actually, and they lost in the wild card round. Wow, was that the second time? The first time or the second? Oh no, they lost to the Packers again. Geez, constant theme with losing to the Packers. Mike McCarthy's their coach. They're 12-5. They're rolling. They hadn't lost a home game all year. That was another year where I thought, okay, they're going to make a run. They'll at least get to a conference championship game with the roster that they had and how everything was lined up for them to play the games at home. Those teams probably I thought would make the run. And what was the second part of the question again?
If there was a season that was, particularly interesting to cover from like a narrative point of view.
Right. So I'll go back to '06. That's Parcells, what turned out to be Bill Parcells last year. Tony Romo comes in the sixth game of the season. They get hot, make it to the playoffs, and then Romo has the bobbled snap in the playoffs. They lose to Seattle. That season was pretty amazing because here's an undrafted rookie takes over for Drew Bledsoe. They get hot, and if that team beats Seattle, then they play Chicago the next week or the Rex Grossman as their quarterback, and you start thinking again the wheels turn as to where they can go. Dak's rookie year, I mean, I gotta be honest. Like when he first got to training camp, he was the fourth quarterback. He wasn't even the third quarterback on the depth chart. With what happened, and then Kellen Moore gets hurt. He starts to play better, becomes the guy. But you keep waiting for Romo to come back in from after he got hurt, and Dak never gave him the job back, and played so well. He was the rookie of the year, and hasn't had he's had the job ever since. Those 2 seasons probably stick out, and maybe it's because you have the similarity, right? It's the quarterbacks. You go in thinking one thing that, hey, this is going to be Drew Bledsoe's season, and him and Parcells second year together. They'll make the run like they did in New England. Didn't happen. Here's Romo out of nowhere. 2016, here's Romo back. He's healthy after a down season in 2015 when he's hurt. And then Dak comes out of nowhere. They go 13-3. It might be the similarities that run through those 2 teams and the narratives that kind of stacked up. But I would put those 2 seasons as like the ones that kind of stand out if they weren't going to make a run necessarily, but just how the season played out unexpectedly.
That's really interesting to hear. I'd kind of forgotten about a lot of that stuff. I've been watching the NFL ever since I could like understand what football was, and vividly like remember seeing the 2014 Cowboys, and then especially, you know, I've heard a lot about, Dak Prescott as a quarterback and questions about whether he's going to be the guy moving forward. Obviously, he's coming off of an injury, but the year before that, if I'm not mistaken, I think he led the league in touchdown passes. So
Yeah,
I
he
was
was
interested.
runner-up. He was an MVP runner-up too. So yeah.
I was sort of interested to hear what are your thoughts on Dallas's quarterback situation going into this year? Do you think they're going to continue to rock with Dak as their guy, or they're going to sort of put him on a short leash?
No, he's definitely their guy. He just signed a contract extension last season that makes him the highest paid quarterback in the game. So I don't mean to say it as he's not going anywhere because of his contract. He's not going anywhere because he's still a really good quarterback. And for like you just mentioned, he led the NFL in touchdown passes 2 years ago. He was second in the MVP voting to Lamar Jackson. When Dak has remained healthy, the Cowboys have been a playoff team. He's just not been able to stay healthy enough. He's missed games in 4 of the last 5 years or something like that with three of the last five or whatever it is, starting with the ankle injury, then he had a calf injury, then he broke his thumb, and then last year with the hamstring injury that required surgery. So if he can stay healthy, I think the Cowboys would contend for a playoff spot, because that's what they do with Dak as their quarterback. He's an excellent quarterback that, like Romo, has to fulfill or live up to standards of Super Bowl or nothing, and then people don't appreciate what you actually are as a player. Like when Tony Romo retired, he was had the highest rated fourth quarter passer rating in the league. No one's gonna, and he had more fourth quarter comebacks too. No one remembers that. They just think, oh, Tony Romo's a choker. He didn't get it done in the playoffs. And the same thing with Dak. He's a runner up for the MVP. He's led the league with 36 touchdown passes. He owns the team record with touchdown passes. This year, he's about to set the team record in yards and touchdown passes. But if he doesn't get to a Super Bowl, it's almost like none of that matters. And it's earlier you talked about like going to different cities and having to learn like the teams, and like I didn't know anything about the Bengals. I didn't know. I mean, I knew something about them, but and I knew a little bit about the Dolphins because the Patriots would play them twice a year, and Dan Marino. And I didn't know the Cowboys' history, so you study up on it before you take the job, and you get there and you learn. Obviously, I knew who Roger Staubach was, I knew who Tom Landry was, but there are names in this franchise history that really, in growing up, I wouldn't have known necessarily or understand their significance with the franchise. And now that I've covered this team as long as I have, like I can pull from the history of the franchise going back to the Landry era, Staubach era Cowboys through the Jimmy Johnson, Troy Aikman, Michael Irvin, Emmitt Smith Cowboys, and compare and contrast that to the teams of today, while also having relationships with players from those eras that I can call and get on the phone if I'm doing a story about what it was like then, what they think is going on now, things like that. And again, I'll go back to a theme I'm probably beaten to death is just being curious about stuff and not just kind of taking the easy way out and just thinking, oh, I got that question answered. Well, there's going to be five more questions that you need to go and ask that person to understand the full context of a story.
You just touched on it a little bit, and it's something that both Brandon and I were pretty curious about. Because I think it's a way that both like the Cowboys and our Patriots relate quite a bit, is there's a certain stigma around like the Cowboys and the Cowboys fans, where because they had so much success previously, they're in a spot, I think, still where if that team doesn't get a Super Bowl or sniff a Super Bowl, even if they have a great season, because they've been a pretty solid team for years, pretty consistently getting to the playoffs. Dak's been a good quarterback for quite a bit, and he's been very consistent, like you said. So, does that stigma of like Super Bowl or bust, or maybe even that negativity, change the coverage of the team? Like, do you find yourself playing into that when you write about or talk about the Cowboys?
And personally, no. So I you try your best just to be fair. There are going to be times where the players aren't going to like what you say because you are always going to bring up the 90s Cowboys and the 70s Cowboys and the Super Bowls that these guys, they're not going to like that, but that's just the facts. Netflix is coming out with a Cowboys series. It's really about Jerry Jones, but I think it's about some of it's touching on the history of the organization. I was watching the trailer, and Michael Irvin was saying playing for the Cowboys is just different. You think you know about everything going in, but until you experience it, you really have no clue what it's like. And I will say, coming here from covering the Bengals and covering the Dolphins are still a pretty big team, right? I mean, they're coming off the end of Marino, Don Shula, still obviously a big name. They had Jimmy Johnson, they had Zach Thomas and Jason Taylor, and really good defense. Just have enough offense to go with it. They still were a popular franchise, popular team that I could like when you go on the road trips, there would be people at the hotels waiting to get autographs. I gotta tell you, like when you show up for a Cowboys deal, especially in Philadelphia, they know when the Cowboys are getting in and they're heckling the hell out of them when they pull into the hotel. Like they're waiting in the lobbies. There's fans. I mean, it truly is America's team, and it does take a little bit of what's the word? It for the player. The Cowboys have to make sure they have players who understand what it's like, and I'm not saying everybody's got to play at Alabama or everybody's got to play at Tennessee. Everybody like you just you have to have players to make sure that they're mentally tough that they don't hear the outside noise. And there's so much outside noise when it comes from the Cowboys because a lot of times obviously the Cowboys sell and they're ratings getters. Everybody watches the Cowboys because you either love them or you hate them. And if it's 50-50, no one really cares, especially in the TV business, as long as you're watching, because that's driving up the prices and everything like that. So I think the players have to be mentally tougher to play for the Cowboys maybe than some other teams. I'm not saying that necessarily about New England, just in general. Um, but I do think they fight history here more than even Green Bay. And I think maybe it's starting up in New England now, how many years since Belichick and Brady and all that. But I always like to point out to my buddies that I don't know, Patrick, if you've met Hig or not, through Brian.
We've met.
He's been a season ticket holder since '93. I like to tell him that he didn't know if the ball was pumped or stuffed when he first got those season tickets. And now all of a sudden they go in the Super Bowl run. He thinks he knows everything about football. He was the punter on our high school team. He didn't know anything about football. So now so good for so long that now everybody in New England, like you guys, you grew up with them winning nothing but championships or at least going to a Super Bowl. That you have these expectations that it happens every year. And I think for the Cowboys fans who grew up in the '90s, they expected that to happen every year. And now, certainly, the Cowboys fans have gotten a generation without getting to a Super Bowl. Patriots fans in the early stages of that, you're seeing what it's like for everybody else in the league. It's hard to get there. And what the Patriots did and doing what they did for so long, not very many teams do. And you know who did? The Cowboys for 20 years in a row had a winning record, and they went to the playoffs under Tom Landry. That was the only other team to have as sustained a run, just not with as many Super Bowls because, oh, by the way, the Pittsburgh Steelers were the other team of the '70s and or at least the '70s.
Um, through that and like talking on reporting and like remaining objective and even like fan opinion. And this one might be a little more so about your own opinion. Um, you were pretty close with Tony Romo, right?
Yeah.
Because I know Brian told me you went to his wedding. So how is that like covering someone that you definitely are friends with, and especially when Romo was on the way out? Like, does that make it hard to cover a situation like that?
No, because you're covering the story. I mean, the story is the story, right? Um, and I used when I talk to players about things, and I'll use Romo as an example of, yeah, we got along well, and I covered him his entire career and got to know him and his family. But Tony also knew that if he had a game where he threw three picks and one of them decided the game, you had to ask the question about the three picks that decided the game. Um, so th- there's there is a balance, I guess, that you can like that you have to walk where you're you can say a guy played poorly in a way where you're just not trashing them completely.
Mhm.
In my mind, that's being fair. Like, okay, tell me what happened on this interception. Tell me what you saw. What surprised you, and you can get the explanation through their point of view into your story to help make the fans and the readers see something that they don't know. Because ultimately, we are in spots where the fans don't see, right? Um, so you're trying to show them something they don't see, get answers to questions that they want to know, but also to explain to them stuff that happened and why it happened the way it happened. But um, it's never gotten in the way of me asking a hard question because if you have the relationships that you've built with guys, or Jason Witten is another one, um, that they know that if something happened, you have to ask the hard question. That's the job, and that's why I would say report. We're friendly with. I don't know if we're friends with, and there is a delicate balance of that. And maybe I'm trying to speak out of both sides of my mouth a little bit, but I think if you have the relationship with the players that you're close to, they understand, or at least they should understand, the times that you have to ask questions that they're not going to like, because you're not going to take a cheap shot at them. I mean, and that's really what they want. There are plenty of people who take cheap shot at players that just to do the gotcha stuff. That's never been me. That's not going to be me. That's not how I go about it.
Another question I had about like pressures and just working in the sports field, and I think it's been very relevant, especially recently. Um, so you've been a Cowboys reporter for going on 20 years now, like you said, and some people will most certainly look to you for like foremost leading updates or news on the Dallas Cowboys. Do
Yep.
you ever find yourself like, is there any pressure in trying to be like the first person or like very early and like getting a scoop or a news story on the team to be able to break that? And has that ever been like a problem or almost even gotten you in trouble?
Um, no, to answer the last part, it hasn't got me in trouble because I've never been someone that has reported something without knowing it's true. It's right, right? I'm not gonna say if I have any if I would critique myself, it's that I'm too conservative of things that I know and not putting it out when I know it a little bit. But it's you just when you break a story, it's funny. You break this story, you know it's right, but if it takes a long while for someone to come and confirm it, you're sitting there like refreshing Twitter or going to the your competition's site and trying to see what they have, and you're like, "Oh, dang, maybe I didn't. Man, shoot, did I mess this up? Did I not get this right?" You know what I'm saying? Just for a brief instant, but and you know you're right, but there's still that instance where you're like, "Ooh, man, when is someone else going to confirm this thing? Let's go." Um, but there is pressure, especially covering the Cowboys, and some of it's self-imposed because you do want to be the voice or among the voices that people come to know what's going on with the Cowboys. The issue that seems to happen now more than it did 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever, is ignoring stuff that you know is wrong that's out there anyway. My general feeling is it's not my job to tell people what the Cowboys aren't doing. It's to tell the Cowboy what the Cowboys are doing, and that's a tricky line because there are times like, hey, they might be trying to sign this guy and they don't sign him, so you're still putting that stuff out there. But if you know, like, they're always linked to these high-priced free agents. They don't do that. They don't sign those guys. They don't really. I mean, very rarely are they going out and signing a high-priced free agent. They're signing their own guys. So the another tricky part of it is, you have all these national insiders now, like Adam Schefter and Rappaport and Tom Pelissero and Mike Garafolo at NFL Network and Jay Glazer at Fox, and they're almost covering the Cowboys too, because it's a national team, right? So they're plugged in. They know everything. They know a lot of people in your organization. They know a lot of the agents. They know even know some of the players. So you're always on your guard as to when, like Micah Parsons' contract. You're always checking in with the people that you check in. Hey, anything new? Anything got to worry about when you think of timing? Anything changing? Da 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 da. But it's a self-imposed pressure, I would say, probably when you've done it as long as I've done it, more than like implied pressure from where either the morning news where I worked before ESPN or even at ESPN. We absolutely want to get everything first. There's no question you're trying to get that, but there's a line that players use when they say, "Hey, they get paid too." Well, the other reporters get paid too. They're going to get some things that you don't get for whatever the reason. But you do want to be known as a reliable, sensible, logical, trustworthy reporter when you're covering a team like the Cowboys, and not someone who's just throwing stuff out there and say, "Well, this guy wrote it. Is it true or not?" You never want to be that guy where they're saying, "Boy, let me check someone else's page here because that guy's been wrong about this, and this." So, it's a lot of things have changed in our business, but I think now the biggest thing is so many people telling you what the Cowboys aren't doing as opposed to what they are doing and
Absolutely.
having to ignore it and ignoring it. It's hard to ignore it because they are talked about so much, right? So if they want to, I'm trying to think of an example lately and I'm having a hard time, but like if there's an example of everybody thinks the Cowboys are going after player X, Jalen Ramsey, he might be an example. Everybody thought the Cowboys, well, they really weren't. You know what I'm saying? Like, so should I have been reporting the Cowboys are not interested in Jalen Ramsey? I mean, I don't think that's my job.
Branching
Hopefully, I
out
don't get
on
fired for that answer.
branching out on that a little bit, you talk about like your personal style of reporting. And my question is, especially when attached to a company like ESPN and moving through different places throughout your career, how do you like try and do your best for the company while also ensuring that you're building your own name and brand? Because I think like even with a company like ESPN, it's got to be very important to get your name out there to people.
That's a good question. And it's funny you mentioned the term brand, right? Because I'm an old dude that I didn't know what a brand was 5 years ago. You know what I'm saying? Like, I never thought, oh, I have a brand, right? I'm like, I'm just throwing my stuff out on Twitter and they want to click on it. Cool, man. Like, I'm not savvy enough to know about these things. But you're right. You do have a following from covering, not because of what I do, but because of the team I cover and who I cover them for. You kind of have a higher profile than other people do. That's just a fact. Again, it's not anything that I've tried to seek out and find the spotlight and say, look at me. I think the look at me reporters. I mean, if you got to do that, then your stuff's not strong enough. So I try not to do that. Now, when you have a news story that you want to get out there, you'll let some people know about it, or you'll make sure your bosses know about it. Um, but the brand thing is interesting because I think ultimately I work for ESPN, so that's the brand that I'm worried about. I'm worried about the ESPN brand. I'm not worried about the Todd Archer brand. But ultimately, in probably 2 years, eventually it's going to be an individual brand, and everybody who has these Twitter followings or social media followings, they're going to be their own media companies in some respects, to where people can still come to the individual as opposed to that site maybe down the road. I always wonder when it comes to those things is, would I get a credential from the Dallas Cowboys for toddarcher.com? I don't know, whatever that website would look like. I don't think I would. I would think I need to be with a ESPN or a Dallas Morning News or a rights holder with the NFL or whatever it would be. That's the hard part of being an independent person, not plugged into a accredited media person. That it's harder to get in the building and to get to know people and to get the stories that the people are going to come to your site to find.
That's super
I don't
interesting.
know.
And
I don't know
you
if that made
talked,
any sense.
it definitely did. And you were talking about like change as you're talking about that, even like 2 years into the future. And things definitely are changing fast. Like I think one thing Brandon and I've noticed just trying to like kick the door down is things have become like increasingly competitive, especially in college and at like the lower levels. Like there's so many people that want to get into the business is one thing that I've noticed very recently. But I'm curious, how much has the business changed like since you got in? And how have you been able to successfully evolve with it?
Great question. So when I got in, it was, I'm kind of trying not, I get into this because I loved reading the Boston Globe on Sunday mornings and the big giant notebooks that they had on the NFL and the NBA, Major League Baseball and hockey, and just devouring that section. And I knew I couldn't play it, so I want to cover it because, man, that's a cool job, right? And I like to write. You have to have those basics down, right? Um, and then, hey, if you occasionally did a Sunday night TV show, man, wouldn't that be cool? But now, like, guys like yourself doing podcasts like this, um, these YouTube people have these YouTube sites that fans will go to, that sometimes I don't know if they all realize, like, not all of them know what they're talking about, but it's really glossy and put together well and packaged well, and it looks really great. Um, But the one thing I always tell people like your age and guys in college and that want to go in this is two words: law school. No, I'm just kidding. If you want to go to law school, you can. Uh, but it is an ever evolving business where you guys do this, right? You have your podcast, and if you write, you write, and you can do a video hit, a short video hit. You can do a radio appearance or a radio. This is basically a radio interview with cameras on our computers, right? I mean, that's kind of what it is. I always tell people it's a little bit like the 53rd guy on a roster. The more you can do, and if you can do edit packet your own packages, do your own podcasts, write well, report well, there'll always be a place for somebody like that because people starve for this stuff. Like they really do. And but you have to be credible. You have to not just be the loudest voice. Just because you're screaming something doesn't mean you're right. It's brings attention to yourself and it looks good and it sounds good, but it might not always be the right thing to do. And so I always viewed it as like I say in the beginning, I graduated college. I went to Concord, New Hampshire, and I covered high school sports and NASCAR. And then I went to Cincinnati, and I came back to the Globe for a little bit and worked on the desk. Then I went to Cincinnati, and I covered college basketball. Like there's levels and steps that you take that I felt like I could make him. The mistakes I made covering a Moeller High School, Elder High School football game in Cincinnati, while still not a good thing, helped me for when I was covering the Bengals. Whereas, like, there's a lot of kids when they come out of school now, it's like, well, I want to cover the Cowboys. Well, get in line. There's a million people that want to cover the Cowboys. Like, how are you going to separate yourself from the rest of the people that want to do that? And sometimes it is taking a step back and covering colleges, covering high schools, building your name, building credibility. And then when you get your chance to move up, you take that next step and you do the same thing again and you become trustworthy and you work from the same pillars, but you're just doing it at a bigger stage. It's but the more you can do, the more you can, like I said, not so much in Dallas, although there's some of that, but like you go to some of these smaller markets and there are a few, like I said, there are a few here in Dallas, but like the TV people, right? They'll write and they'll do their on camera stuff and they'll shoot their own stuff and then they'll edit all their own stuff. Like it's kind of like I could shoot something. I could not edit something. I would be I'm an idiot when it comes to my phone video, trying to edit a video from vacation from my wife. So it's hard to if you guys have those skills, you're a leg up on old farts like me at the end on the back nine of our careers to where you'll do more stuff that your bosses know about and that helps them cover things in a different way. Like before, all I had to do is write a story. Well, now it's like, okay, I want to write this story, but is there a video element that can go with it? Is there a talk back that we can do with SportsCenter on it? Is it, you have to think in all these different realms. Where before it's like, oh, the story's in, good, on to the next one. Where you kind of have to think ahead now and think of all these different things that might come with a story that you're doing. Like I'm doing a story on Brian Schottenheimer, and he's got these tattoos on his arm. And like I mentioned it, TV is already SportsCenter is already doing something, or NFL Countdown might be doing it later on with somebody else. I'm like, okay, I'm good there. Well, there was a visual that we were able to get with the tattoos and do things and write the story in a different way. So I think how to tell the story has changed in terms of the different mediums. So the more mediums you're comfortable on, the better off you guys will be. That was the same answer like 15 different times. I apologize for that.
It was definitely a great answer though, and it's super incredible insight for I think anybody listening that has a curiosity, and then also especially like people like Brandon and I who are trying to get in. And so one question I do have following up on that, and then we're going to move into a little bit more fun stuff, including some questions from fans that Brandon compiled. But one thing I was super curious about is like if you had like say only one piece of advice for somebody in our shoes, like me and Brandon, or say you when you were just starting, what would that one piece of advice be?
I already gave it to you, law school. No, just um, don't get discouraged, right? It's funny. So I had a goal in 1994. You guys weren't even born. The World Cup was in the U.S. for the first time. I'm a big soccer fan, love it. And my goal was to cover the World Cup for whoever. It could have been Globe, Concord, wherever I was, right? Well, the World Cup came and went, and I never covered it. And it it bummed me out because I wanted to cover a World Cup and see what it's like. Um, guess what's coming here next summer? The World Cup. I have a meeting in 2 weeks in Bristol that I've already said like, hey, and there's 9 games at AT&T Stadium. I'm like, I want to cover the World Cup. Like, this is something that I've wanted to do forever. So I would just say, don't get discouraged. There's plenty of jobs that I applied for, didn't even get a letter back um, to say, hey, thanks, appreciate you. There are jobs that I interviewed for that I didn't get. I interviewed, and it's funny. Let me count my years back here. Had to have been like 98 or so. I interviewed at the Palm Beach Post to cover the Dolphins, and I didn't get the job, and I was pissed because I wanted to, move on from. I was at a smaller paper in Cincinnati, and I wanted to move up the chain. Right? I would have been 28. Is that? Hold on, 28, 29, 28. I don't know, something like that. And I was pissed. Well, then a year and a half later, Palm Beach Post called me and they offered me the job. So I was able to get there. Like in 2003, the Morning News called me. And man, like the Morning News and the Globe, like that's synonymous with like best sports sections ever type stuff. And I'm like, yeah, let's go. And I think if I got discouraged from not getting that reply from the whatever paper in 1993, I might have just said screw this and not driven out of my parents' driveway to go to Cincinnati in 1996 and get on this path that I've been on because it's been a blessed path. I'm living my dream. If you ask the next time you see Brian, ask him what I wanted to do when I was a sophomore in high school, and he'd tell you it's exactly what I'm doing right now. So I got sick my senior year in high school. I had something called Guillain-Barré syndrome, where I had mono and the antibodies that fight mono turned. They ate my nerves away, and I really couldn't move. I was like painful. It was like it was awful, especially for a high school senior and ear active. But I remember I don't know if it was the Middlesex News, which is now the Metro West Daily News, or the Milford News. One of them did a story on me, and they asked me what I wanted to do. And I said my goal was to cover an NBA Finals sitting next to Bob Ryan. Well, I didn't get to sit next to Bob Ryan in NBA Finals, but I got to work with Bob Ryan, right? So, like, this is what I always wanted to do. Um, I don't know what I would do if I didn't do this, which is both good and sad in a way because you should, but I do believe that this job it allows you to be well rounded, and you have to have a certain amount of emotional intelligence to get through the job, and that might be faking your way through knowing the ins and outs of quarters coverage in the NFL, and or three buzz coverage, where the safeties are coming down. Sure, I might be able to fake it a little bit on some of that stuff, but I think this job and what you guys are pursuing would it allow you and open up more avenues to things that you're not even thinking about right now if this didn't work out for you. Like I've had friends leave the business that have gone on to other, public relations or just different fields that they've like, you don't understand like how much you're trained your mind into finding answers to questions in ways that people in the real world aren't, because different places to look. You know how to not just Google something or AI the crap out of it these days. Like you understand how to pick up a phone and call people. Like that's a lost art and to a lot of people these days of actually communicating with people. So, but the first one thing I would say is don't get discouraged because there's going to be a lot of no's before you get the yes you want.
That's awesome.
That's really, yeah, definitely very inspiring to hear.
I'm gonna write a book. Hold on.
So we're gonna move into some more fun stuff. And the first question is something that me and Patrick were actually talking about briefly, like right before you joined, which is Johnny Manziel. When he was in college, when he was entering the draft, obviously went to Texas A&M, was a huge name all over the nation. Did Johnny Manziel ever sort of creep his way into Cowboys coverage? Did you ever have to write stories about him? And was that fun? What was that like?
So that was 2014 when he was coming out and he was falling in the draft. And, that was that was 12 years of Romo's 12th year in the league, maybe. So you're starting to think, okay, they got to start thinking for the future because Tony's getting a little older. He's been banged up. Yeah, he's not, Manziel won't be there when the Cowboys pick at, I think they picked 14th that year. But then he's fallen and he's fallen and he's fallen. Then all of a sudden you're like, well, Jerry Jones, okay, this kind of makes sense here. You can see it happening. And then, so they ended up taking Zach Martin, and who is a Hall of Famer, just retired this year, guard, Notre Dame, unbelievable player, unbelievable guy, great draft pick. But he was always compared to Johnny Manziel. I should say Johnny might have been compared to him, but he was always, the fact that they took him over Manziel was always a storyline throughout his career. And I think I remember when Jerry Jones had the press conference after, and we asked him, why didn't you take Manziel? Why did you took an offensive lineman? That's not something da 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 da. And Jerry gave an answer along that basically said, we just hit it down we hit a base, we had a base hit. We had a chance to get a home run and we took a base hit. And you could see that he was disappointed. And he was like, he wanted to go for the home run and taking Johnny Manziel because it's Johnny football. It's a Heisman Trophy winner. It's a quarterback. It's all those things. It's Texas A&M. He's thinking of the jersey sales. He's got all this stuff in his head. But they were able to convince him that his son, Steven, Will McClay, the director of player personnel at the time, and his college scouts, were saying, no, this is the guy, and Jason Garrett, the coach at the time, were able to convince Jerry that this was the right pick. And that story, it came back up because Zach retired this offseason as to the Cowboys passing on Johnny Manziel to take a Hall of Fame guard. Certainly worked out for the Cowboys more ways than one.
I think it's got to be just like such an interesting era, and not necessarily just like Dallas football, but like Texas football in general. Because I feel like Manziel, like to this day, is such like a beloved figure in that community. And it's so interesting to me because he's definitely like he was a prolific college football player, especially, but he's even more of like a prolific personality because like a
Correct.
lot followed him around in his career.
So remember, I
Um,
told you needed to be mentally tough to play here and do that. This would have been the absolute worst place for Johnny football to come and play because all of the trappings of this team would have made it impossible for him. And I think that's part of the reason, very low on the reasons why they passed on him. That played a part in it because yeah, as bad as it was for him in Cleveland, it would have been equally as bad here in Dallas.
absolutely.
Can only imagine what it would have been like to cover Johnny football throwing 4 picks at AT&T Stadium in a primetime game. Absolutely, absolutely brutal headlines could have come up there. So we have some viewer questions. The
Okay.
first one will start from Chris H in Plymouth, Mass. How do you think George Pickens fits with the Cowboys' current scheme and offensive personnel?
I think he's been one of the best pickups they've had in a long time. It sounds like we're trending in a fantasy football area right now when people are going to ask this question. Um, he's yeah, he's got the baggage that he had in Pittsburgh, and you can say whatever you want to say about all that stuff. But he comes to the Cowboys needing to have a big year because it's a contract year, right? So he's going to be, I hate to even say it this way, on his best behavior, whatever that means. But he knows he needs to have a big year to cash in and get the big contract. So I think the Cowboys are hedging their bets on that. And I think you look at their receiver room, they had CeeDee Lamb and the three of us catching passes. That's too harsh. But they needed another guy, and he's certainly a playmaker. So Brian Schottenheimer's offensive coordinator, new head coach, or offensive play caller, new head coach, he now has a balanced offense to where if they want to play cover two and play the safeties deep, then they can run the ball and feel good about doing that. And they still have CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. I think as CD said, you can't double everybody. So I think the George Pickens signing is probably one of the best one, or the trade is one of the best ones the Cowboys have made. And if he does do nothing this year, we can burn this. And I never said any of that.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of talk just about where he's going to fit in next to CD because CD's been, one of the top guys in the NFL. I'm
But
definitely
CD's
interested to
also,
see where
but
he
you got to
sits.
remember, CD played with Amari Cooper. There were enough passes, Michael Gallup. There's got to be enough passes to go around. and plays to make. So I don't. I'm not going to say he's always going to be happy, and I'm not going to say. And I bet you there'll be times where CD's not going to be happy with the balls thrown his way. But I think ultimately it's going to make it work, and a big reason is that Dak will make it work.
Definitely be make for exciting football. I certainly hope. The NFL seems to
Yeah.
be doing better when the Cowboys are in the mix and competitive. So next up from Logan M in Bellingham, Mass. He had a couple questions. Who is your favorite player to talk with on the Cowboys currently? And are the Cowboys your favorite NFL team, or does that go to another franchise?
Um, I'll go the second part first. Favorite team? What was it again? Favorite team to?
Are the Cowboys your favorite NFL team?
No, no. Well, it kind of goes back to the other answer, right? Not a fan of the any team, really. You're a fan of games when you do what I do. You always want to see a good game. And like I have a bad habit. Like when I'm watching a game, I'm always rooting for the team that's losing because I want to see how they come back. I want to see this strategically how they come back and how they're trying to get back in the game and trying to think their way through it and as opposed to just maybe giving up or whatever. So I always root for a good game and just wanting to see again, you're losing 14-3. Well, now you're going to throw it in the second quarter. You're going to throw it every down and just take yourself out of the game, or you're going to try and, hey, we can still run the ball here and score a touchdown and make it a one-score game, and you're right back into it. I want to see how teams think their way through games. Um, and the first part again was who's my favorite current Cowboy to talk to? It has to be Dak. He's among the top 5 players, and I could now I could think like 10 guys, but top 5 guys that I've covered in my career, just in terms of that, right? Like we talk to the quarterbacks once a week, but there are times you can pull Dak off to the side, or he'll sit at his locker and just BS with him about golf, about Mississippi State football, about Mississippi State women's basketball, softball, anything, right? Like now that he has 2 children, you can talk to him about being a dad and raising kids, and his story of what he's had to overcome from his mom's death when he was in college, his brother's suicide when he was with the Cowboys, um, how genuine a person that he is. You never want to. So Lee Montville was he's a columnist at the Boston Globe way back in the day. And he was at Sports Illustrated. And he was a guy when I was at the Globe that I got to know. And we would play basketball on Monday nights in this intra Globe basketball league. And sports department, we were the worst team in the league. We were awful because me and him were the backcourt, and Lee was 52 at the time, or whatever he was. But he always said something to me that stood out that I still use today a lot of times is about the relationship between athletes and the media. And it's we are of their world, we are not in their world, right? There is a distinction there. Like we are not in it, we're of it, we're around it, we see it. And I think with Dak, you never want to get into a situation where you're overdoing what these guys do and what type of person they are because of the 25 minutes they spend in the locker room with you on a Thursday afternoon. Um, but I think with Dak, you see the stuff that he does for a children's cancer fund. You see what he does when he has his football camp and how he interacts literally with every kid, 500 campers. He's literally doing something with all of them. He is a genuine guy that I enjoy talking to, not just about football, but a whole bunch of other things. And we have training camp coming up here soon. And I have a book, and I'd show you right now, but I'm holding up my computer with it. It's called How Champions Think by Dr. Bob Rotella that I told him I was reading. And he's like, can I read that after you're done with it? I'm like, yeah. So I got to bring him that book in training camp. So like he's trying to he's a genuine guy, and he's still learning or thirsting for knowledge on things like that. So I would say Dak, and then Jason Witten, probably all time guy, just getting to know um, and his story and where he came from and his background and the numbers that he was able to put up and things he was able to do. And he's another guy that probably explained football to me better than anybody that ever been around.
That's amazing. I think it's awesome to hear like the good stories about players because oftentimes you also hear like so many bad players or bad stories from both sides where you hear like media's negative reaction to be a player being distasteful, or even on the opposite side, which you might hear more, like a player having a negative reaction to the media being distasteful. So it's great to hear those stories from both sides. I'm circling back just a little bit.
Let me call a timeout for a second. One thing you just talked about, another like in the change of the business, right? So like I got to know Jason Witten because on Fridays, look, our stories are done. It's an easy day in the locker room, and I could sit at his locker next to him for like 20 minutes, and we just BS about stuff. Like, hey, what you gonna get any balls this week? What do you think? What's the game plan? Da da da. And you build a relationship and a rapport that he knows I'm not writing what he's telling me so much, but I'll have a background and understand things. And so he played his last year here was 2019, maybe 2018. Um, so I got to know him from 2003 to his year Monday Night Football, and then he came back afterwards. And I still talk to him to this day a whole bunch. But he, the that era is gone. Like players don't need us anymore. And I'm not saying they ever needed the media, but because of social media, Instagram, Twitter, they're their own media guys now in a lot of respects, right? They can send out their own message and put it out there, and it's their truth on things. Maybe not the whole truth, but it's their truth, and that's all. I think like a discerning fan would understand. Like, okay, that's player X's story or theory on this. What's the team say? And then you merge these things together, and in between what the team is saying, what the player is saying is the truth. But the players don't look to have a relationship with the media anymore because they've been so ingrained to think we are the enemy. In some respects, it's a deserved reputation for some in the media, and then they can also get their message out on their own. They don't need somebody else to filter their words in the locker room and bring it out. They can just go on Twitter and say whatever they want to say. So that's another avenue, another um, change in this business that you've had to learn how to deal with, to say it the polite way.
Mhm.
Sorry, I didn't
Uh,
mean to interrupt. I just wanted to make that point too.
no, that was incredible insight. One thing I am curious about is you talk about being more of like a fan of the game than any one team. And so my question, like following that up, is growing up in the area where we come from, you know, almost everyone's a Patriots fan. So my question for you is, were you a Patriots fan growing up? Do you still follow them to a degree? And if you did, like how were you able to like detach yourself from that when moving into the media?
Right. So I was not a Patriots fan growing up. Part of that is they were so bad when I was growing up. I mean, like we couldn't even watch their games on TV when they played at Foxborough because of the blackout rule that you guys probably have no idea about. Um, so it, and there were times we could go to the games. No, I don't want to. And maybe the yeah, I'll say it. So the Medway Police used to work the gates at the old Foxborough Stadium, and the games were never sold out, so we would know where Officer blah 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 would be, and he let us in the stadium. So for free, like after the game started, and we just go find a seat. But I was not a fan of them growing. I enjoyed them going to the Super Bowl in 1985. That was cool because it was the first time in my life that I experienced that, even if they got killed by the Bears. But it didn't like I wasn't crushed that they lost. Right? I was honestly more of a Giants fan growing up because my dad was a Giants fan. So, and it's funny that Parcells was the coach of the Giants when I first started to get into the NFL, and then 20 years later, I was covering Bill Parcells in Dallas. So that was kind of cool. Um, but it's it's um it's not as hard to detach yourself as you would think because, like I said, you don't want to take your fandom out of the game because the people who are reading your stuff enjoy these teams and enjoy the game, right? So you want to make sure that you're enjoying it too, and you're seeing it through a fan's eye and not just so jaded that you're just kind of ruining everything for everybody else. So, but you're not a fan in the respect of Adam Vinatieri kicks the field goal to beat the St. Louis Rams, where you're standing up in the press box woo-hooing. Like, no, you're not doing that. There is a local member of the Boston media now, a pretty prominent guy, um, that did do something along those lines that he would never admit to doing it these days. And I won't tell you who that is, but it's interesting. It's not as hard to detach yourself from it because honestly, when you've been doing it a long time, or maybe not even a long time, you're taught to just get the story, right? I mean that's kind of how you're supposed to go about it.
You mentioned the blackout rule, and I think I remember my mom telling me about that. It was that they couldn't air the games on television if the
If
games
they
weren't
weren't
sold
sold
out.
out, right? Exactly.
Wow, that is
They had to
crazy.
be
Like,
sold out. I think it might have been like the Tuesday before the game. If the game wasn't sold out, you could not watch that on television. So yeah, we were left. We probably saw more Giants games because they would show something in that era, in that time frame, and there was I would probably assume it was the Giants. But yeah, we did not have. We didn't. There would be more games we didn't see at Foxborough Stadium, and they were so bad that that was fine by us.
yeah, my mom and my grandfather used to have to listen to the games on the radio most of the time because they would just wouldn't sell them out and then
Yeah.
wouldn't show up on TV,
And it
which
was a
it's
big deal, like when
crazy.
like early on in Kraft's time, maybe it might have been, obviously it might have been like Parcells and Bledsoe's first year or so, or maybe it was like the end, like the team would buy the remaining 4,000 seats to guarantee the sellout or something like that. Like it was just it's kind of funny to think about that, and they don't have that rule anymore, by the way. But it was kind of funny to think about that being a rule back in the day.
Can't imagine what that would be like now. If you had a team that was performing poorly and they weren't even getting shown on TV, something I can't even like think of happening now. We have another question from Ethan S. in Medway, Mass. And this is something you mentioned earlier about sort of not rooting for a team, but looking for a good game. What is the craziest moment that you've covered in your career as a journalist?
Well, it's a kid from Medway, so I got to have a good answer. Ooh. I, I'm mixing this up between best things that I've covered and what he used the term crazy. Is that right?
Yep.
Mhm.
So I'm struggling between crazy and best. Like I was when Tiger Woods won his first Masters. I covered that. I was there. So that remains like the in '97. That remains like the most impressive event that I've ever covered. Um, the craziest game. Let me see if it was. I was covering the Dolphins. They were playing the Giants on a Monday Night Football. It's early fourth quarter, and the Dolphins are up. I want to say 30-7. So, and we're on a deadline, right? So, like, you got to have you're writing during the game. You're barely watching it because you're typing stuff up, and you can see the big plays and do 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 do. So it's like 30-7 in the fourth quarter. I don't know how much time was left, but you're like, all right, this one's over. The Dolphins came to the Meadowlands, kicked the Jets' ass, da 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 da, and here's how it happened. Well, the Jets came back and won. Like there was an unbelievable comeback, um, and the Dolphins just kind of just gave it away. There was Jumbo Elliott, a tackle for the Jets, might have caught the game-winning touchdown pass from I think Vinny Testaverde might have been the Jets quarterback. But here you're talking about crazy, and I can't remember all the stuff, so that's why I'm mixing it up between crazy and best. But that would probably been the craziest game that I've covered just because that game was over three different times and you had to write. So like you literally wrote Dolphins win, Dolphins lose, Dolphins almost lose but come back and win. So I mean you're just writing as you go and like you end up with like just 1,000 words of that will never see the light of day ever. And it's just yeah, that was probably the craziest game. And the more I think about this, I'm trying to think of some other things that were pretty crazy. And best. Like I covered Xavier basketball. They beat Cincinnati when Cincinnati was the number one team in the country. And like the early on in the season with a buzzer beater that was pretty unbelievable. Um, boy, I gotta have more than that, but those three came to my head immediately when I was thinking about best and crazy stuff.
That's really funny. You mentioned the whole process of writing as the game's going on, having like stuff that you write that won't see the light of day. Because I remember that came up in a very big way for Super Bowl 51, the Patriots and the Falcons. I remember like in like the weeks following that, there's a YouTube video that was circulating around where they had all of like the unused titles and all the unused stories from Super Bowl 51.
Yeah.
That that is such a cool process that like you end up at the end of a game with like a whole story and like a narrative that will like it just didn't happen.
Yeah, it's like the T-shirts of the other of the team that loses the Super Bowl ends up in some third world country. So
Yep.
this story ends up going in the middle of nowhere as well. And that's it's not really changed for like newspapers, the deadline stuff, but like for us at ESPN, it's changed a lot. Where I mean, yeah, you're on deadline, but it's not like you're writing a game story now, right? You're writing something different, and but you still have to have 500, 600, 700 words done. Like as soon as the game ends, you're hitting send to your editor, and then you're flying down to the locker room to make sure you can get there to interview guys. So there's still like that. That's our adrenaline, right? There's athletes have their own deal, but like that's our thing, like where we're trying to come up with the right news and notes of a game going on right at that time, and then like you go back and you read and like, oh god, that was terrible. What was I thinking? But then there are also times where you're like, okay, no, I got that one pretty good. So it's just like players. You have good games and bad games.
Yeah, I think it's definitely
Hopefully I
like
helped out that Medway kid with that answer.
I'm sure he'll be more than happy with it. And
Yeah.
it's definitely such like a an interesting process with like the deadlines. And that's like one thing in the field to me where like I haven't had to experience that yet because obviously like Brandon and I both try and like dip our toes in as many ways as we can. But that's one thing that absolutely terrifies me at this point. Because there's never been anything like as deadline dependent or as quick as
Mhm.
that in the experience yet. And I feel like that's one of those things where like in my eyes, it's almost like you're just thrown in. Like once you get to that, like obviously you have like the practice of like, you know how to write well, you know what you need to write, you understand the game, but then you get there and having to like put it all together is just like such a different experience.
So here's a back in my day story of walking uphill both ways in snow and all that kind of stuff. Um, so obviously when I started this thing, we didn't have the internet, right? So we used to have to like say I'm covering a high school basketball game for the Globe, and your story was 60 twills. A twill is a typewritten line. So it's maybe like a 15-inch story. So 15, it's probably, I'm trying to think of how many words that might be. Call it 500. I might be off by a lot or a little. I don't know. But so you're at a high school gym and you're taking your notes down, and you know, Simpson jumper, you know, LeBlanc turnover. Sorry, Brandon. But like so then you got to like formulate and write all this stuff, and then all of a sudden, again, no internet. You either had to hope the athletic director was still in the gym, that you could use his phone to plug in these couplers on an old phone for like, and you jam the phone into these couplers, and it would send the story electronically that way. Or if you like, there was one time I was on the side of the road at a payphone, same thing. You call it up, you hear the click, you push the couplers in, you hit press, and like I had the jacket up over my head because it was snowing out with and I'm at this payphone. I can only imagine what people were thinking as they were driving by me and thinking like, what is this guy doing? Like it's not that important, but like that was how we sent our stuff in back in the day. And again, you're on a little bit of a deadline. Um, say the basketball game started at 7 and it got over at 9. Well, you had to have it in for first edition by 9:45, right? So yeah, okay, you might have 45 minutes from the game ending to when you have to send it in. But then it's like, well, the coach took longer to talk to this and the star player didn't come out. And so then you're kind of typing and you're waiting and it was a whole process back in the day. It's far different now where you can just pull up your phone, and as you're waiting for the press conference, start typing on your phone, and have it, and then either email it to yourself or email it in as you go. It's a far, far different world. Thankfully, a much easier world now.
Absolutely. I think it's changed so much. We do have one more viewer question that I think is very interesting, and I'm excited to hear your answers.
From
Brandon,
Brian
if you want to
O
ring
in
that off.
Bellingham. No?
He refrained.
Oh, okay.
Um,
From
um,
Grady O in Central Connecticut.
um, Not quite. But it's a very interesting question. I think it's a fun question to end off on, and I'm curious to hear your perspective. If you want to ring that off, Brandon.
This one comes in from Mike S. in Bellingham, Massachusetts. What are your top three sports movies?
Oh, good one. All right. Full Durham, Miracle. God, only three, huh? Uh, what's the Will Ferrell basketball with the Flint
Semi-pro.
Tropics?
Semi-pro.
Semi-pro.
That's on
Yeah,
my
that
list
one.
too.
Yeah.
I have Miracle and Semi-pro in my top three. Brandon and I were both
Corn
talking
dogs,
about this
Jackie.
before.
Corn dogs. That one. That one. And the original Bad News Bears. I gotta tie him. I gotta put that in there too. The original one, not the Billy Bob Thornton one. So
Yep,
that was a good one growing up.
absolutely. It's a great list. I think it was definitely exciting to see some overlap there because Brandon and I were talking about this question before we started, and it's just so interesting to hear because we also had like such a dilemma because there's so many good sports movies. So you hear that number three, and it's like, well, geez.
I'm trying to think of now. You got me like I can think of a lot of bad ones, but I don't want to name them. Like there was a very popular football movie that me and my buddy saw in the theaters in the late 90s, I think it was, and we were just laughing because of how many stereotypes it played on in the NFL and what an NFL locker room is like. It's like, oh God, this is awful. We were literally just laughing out loud in the middle of the theater. But yeah, like and I don't even know if Semi Pro is a sports movie, but it's just pretty funny.
Close enough.
Yeah, and Miracle's Miracle that was a
Yeah.
seminal moment in U.S. history, and Bull Durham just because you get sentimental about yeah, about baseball and what that means. I don't know. I guess I could have said Field of Dreams or something like that too. So
That was in my top three. Was Field of Dreams. Kevin Costner's got a knack for baseball movies. I don't know what it is between like For Love of the Game, Field of Dreams, and
yeah.
Bull Durham. That's just guy must love baseball.
Well, the only thing I didn't like it was it Field of Dreams where they had Shoeless Joe batting on the wrong side.
I think it was that. Yeah,
Yeah. So that one that took off a little points from my deal. 8 Men Out's a good one. Yeah, I mean there's yeah. I'm trying to go find the fish that saved Pittsburgh. Dr. J was in that one. Julius Irving, UMass.
Mhm.
Hopefully that even rings a bell. I don't know.
Yep.
Uh, but yeah, it was gosh, I'm trying to think. Slapshot, another good, great. That's a hockey one there.
classic.
How come we don't have a good football one? Like I don't Brian song, I would really never get into that one.
Remember the Titans was solid.
Yeah, that
Yep.
was a good one. Yeah. True story. And actually, guys I went to college actually played at that high school. Not that era. I'm not that old, but they came from that TC Williams High School.
Wow.
That's a good one.
The
But,
replacements with Keanu Reeves was pretty funny. I thought.
yeah, he actually played the quarterback position pretty good. I thought too. He actually, yeah, he was. You could tell he wasn't faking it like the whatever the movie they did on Kurt Warner. It's like, man, this guy's never thrown a football in his life.
I feel like Adam Sandler definitely dabbles in there in the football world a little bit too. And I don't know if you'd call
Yeah,
them great movies, but definitely funny. Like The Water Boy comes to mind.
yeah. Happy
Longest Yard
Gilmore.
remake.
Happy
Yeah,
Gilmore.
he actually, yeah. And shoot, any of those grown-ups movies when he's playing basketball, he's got an okay game.
Hmm.
Not a sports movie though. I'm trying to.
Yeah.
What was the and we got Happy Gilmore, whatever the heck the remake is or the sequel is coming out soon too, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's gonna be interesting. I'm kind of shocked that they're doing that. Um, Definitely is a world where nostalgia sells though, so
Yeah,
I'm expecting that one to be pretty big.
no doubt.
Um, I do think that is all we're gonna have time for today.
Okay.
Todd, we really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for
Um,
having me.
you're doing us a great favor. Is there anything else you want to say before we end it?
Gosh, I hope I didn't bore you guys enough, so I don't want to leave you with anything else. So I'm gonna leave it on a high note, I think.
It was an amazing
But
conversation.
yeah,
For
let me
us at
know
the
how it
play,
does. Let me know what the feedback did you guys get on it.
of
I'd
course,
like to know.
Absolutely.
absolutely.
All right.
So for us at the play-by-play, that was all. Thank you very much for listening, and make sure to tune in next time. Thank you for listening to the play-by-play with Patrick and Brandon. Make sure to check out our Instagram and stay on the lookout for new episodes on YouTube or Spotify.